throw some questions at you.
Well, thank you, Nick. Hi, everybody. I'm so glad to be with you this evening. I'm Lauren Underwood, the Congresswoman for the 14th Congressional District. I want to start off by telling you about when I first met the legendary Congressman John Lewis. So it's 2006. I was an intern on Capitol Hill. I was interning through the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation, and he had generously agreed to participate in our summer speaker series. And he spoke to a group of us, all college-aged Black students, about the importance of public service and getting into what he called good trouble. And I was just in awe. He's a giant who had just taken the time to talk to all of us. And that moment has stuck with me over the past 15 years, especially his message of standing up for what is right. And so I was heartbroken to lose Congressman Lewis, one of our country's foremost advocates for voting rights. And it's been almost a year since he passed. And I really hope that we can continue honoring his legacy by ensuring that the John Lewis Voting Rights Act gets passed into law as soon as possible. Every federal elected official and appointee takes an oath, and the oath says that we will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and that will faithfully discharge the duties of our office. It's clear that we do have federal officials who have not taken that oath to heart, and it's unacceptable. In order for our democracy to truly work for the people, it has to be by the people, not just the wealthy, not just the well-connected, but by everyday Americans. And that's why I support the Voting Rights Act, which would protect and expand the right to vote. I'm committed to restoring voting rights and pursuing a strong anti-corruption agenda to ensure that every federal elected official serves the public and not themselves. Now, along those same lines, during my time in the House, one of my top priorities has been cleaning up Washington. The overt corruption that we saw during the Trump administration truly degraded public trust in our government. And so one of the first pieces of legislation that I supported as a member of Congress was the For the People Act, which, as you know, reduces the role of money in politics. It strengthens ethics rules to make sure that politicians actually serve the public interest, and it makes it easier and not harder to vote. Now, we obviously have a lot of work to do to restore our nation's faith in our democracy, and this legislation is exactly where we need to start. Now, contrary to the democratic principles of our Constitution, our political system unfairly favors the powerful and ends up drowning out the voices of many of the people, including many of the folks that I represent here in Northern Illinois. The For the People Act takes bold action to deliver on an unfulfilled promise of a government by and for the people by protecting the right to vote, preventing foreign interference in our election, which is something that we know far too personally here in Illinois. It makes advancements in fighting corruption and increases transparency in campaign finance. I was proud to support these long overdue reforms to strengthen the foundation of our democracy and place power in the hands of the people. Now, obviously, the House approved the For the People Act a couple months ago, and we are waiting for the John Lewis Voting Rights Act to be reintroduced. And I think that y'all are familiar with why that's happening in that way. But there are two things that we need to do right now. First, we need to continue to lean on the Senate, and we need to continue to reach out to the White House to make sure that we are pushing both pieces of legislation across the finish line. And then secondly, we have to elect candidates who really want to prioritize this kind of democracy reform and the ideals that are in the underlying pieces of these legislative items. I mean, we cannot, I'm trying to be careful with my words here, but we cannot be supporting people who are undermining our efforts to restore our democracy, even if they want to call themselves Democrats. So I appreciate the work that you're doing to make this happen. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to share a few words, and I think we're going to do a couple questions, so I'm happy to take the questions. Thank you.
Thanks so much. It's very spirited sort of intro to this very important legislation. I know that you do care a lot about defeating corruption, and that you've fought some really hard campaigns in your district, and one of the provisions in the For the People Act that you mentioned is around campaign finance, and the FTPA makes some space for more alternative financing models for campaigns. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that, and from this perspective of somebody who just recently started their congressional career, and about sort of what the impact of those provisions would be if the law came into being.
Yep. So inside the For the People Act is a small dollar donor financing program that candidates could elect to participate in. And that would completely transform the way that federal elections are run in this country. It would create, well, we believe it will create an opportunity for a more representative Congress, which is something that I am personally committed to. And I was really proud to be able to introduce and pass an amendment that will require a study on how that small dollar donor financing program would impact the diversity of candidates. Because so often the first metric that any candidate encounters when they are engaging with particularly the party committees or any kind of active group in at least Democratic politics is not what do you stand for, but it's how much have you raised and how much can you raise. And the conversation is exclusively about money. And so in effect, well, in most communities, the candidates that are most representative of that community, the candidates that have the most grassroots support are not the candidates that often become their nominees. It's usually the candidate that can raise the most money. And so, I think that my story is one that is very much the exception to the rule. However, I do celebrate that my story is possible in this country, right? Because only in the United States can someone like me get herself on the ballot and win a competitive election like this, right? So, while we celebrate reform, let's also acknowledge that we have a system that allows different types of voices to enter into the conversations and ultimately sit at these decision-making tables. But I do think that the small dollar financing program in particular could make a huge difference. And it is my hope that as the Senate considers this legislation, that is not one of the provisions that they would seek to strike.
Yeah, it's definitely one of my sort of favorite and one of the most intriguing provisions in the bill. I think at least talked about. I mean, I think the For the People Act is mostly framed as a voting rights bill, which it is largely. But I think that provision in particular is really important, and just the benefit for people running if this law gets passed is potentially very high. So as somebody who just recently started their congressional career, are there other pieces of the For the People Act bill that you think will help to open the door more for people running, and what are those?
Well, I think that I don't actually know if the child care provisions got codified in this year's version of the For the People Act. I know that we passed it as a standalone, but that is huge. Obviously, we are still lagging behind in terms of representative government, and we do not have an equal number of men and women serving in the Congress. We have the most women serving right now, and that is because of gains made on the Republican side of the aisle in this last election. And I think that, one of the big concerns is that we are locking out moms with kids who are active and need active childcare. That they are not able to mount competitive campaigns. And the provision that was Katie Porter, she introduced it in the House to allow for the FEC to permit childcare expenses. That is critically important, right? Like, we have to have a campaign finance structure that reflects modern life. And obviously, the FEC, the Federal Election Commission, is a largely ineffective body right now because the Trump administration, allowed that to happen. Let's not say that they're at fault. It's just we need to make sure that the FEC is empowered to do their work to oversee federal elections. And as they, seek to modernize this process, I'm excited that we will have those kinds of resources as a young woman in politics. I will also say the other thing that I'm excited about in this bill is just the money for local jurisdictions to secure their elections. One of the things that's happening across this country, no secret to the folks on this call, is that the Republican-led state legislatures have enacted a wave of voter suppression laws, and they're doing it under the guise of trying to secure our election. Now, even Republican officials will acknowledge that the 2020 election was secure. But they are able to pass these kinds of restrictions because the threat continues to loom. And part of that is because we have just continued to underfund those jurisdictions that are administering our elections, right? Old voting machines, you don't have, they're not auditable, and, there's just like all these problems. And that is something that's within this bill, right? Getting those dollars out to the states and the local officials, it's huge and really important. So it's not about diversity, but it's one about confidence in our democracy. And I think that in a time when the American people have record low levels of confidence, particularly among conservative leaning independents and Republicans are not able to verbalize confidence in our democracy, that's what really makes us vulnerable.
Absolutely. And as we move on in the year, and as sort of time keeps ticking away here, I know a lot of people on the call are starting to get a little antsy, a little concerned that we For the People Act isn't across the finish line yet. Obviously, the Senate is where we need to be pushing, as you said. One of the reasons that people are concerned about that is redistricting, the redistricting provisions in the bill, and the fact that it would require independent redistricting commissions in states. That probably, well, I don't want to presume. How would that impact Illinois, and how do you see your congressional district being impacted? If For the People Act does pass, if it doesn't pass, and just what do you think about the importance of that piece of the law?
Right. So in Illinois, we have a Democratic supermajority in our state legislature. There is no independent commission. And Betsy's right, Illinois is losing a seat in our congressional delegation based on that initial Census Bureau data. Now, there has not been even a draft map that has been released. And I think part of the reason is because the Trump folks totally screwed up the census, and the census is so late. The census is so late. So what this means is it is not great in terms of, people like me who are anxious, but it does mean that there's still an opportunity to pass important reform and have it go into effect for 2022. So the window of opportunity has not closed because the Census Bureau is behind schedule. Now, I personally do support the independent commissions. I think it's very important, but I will say this, and this is a real talk conversation, so I want y'all to hear me. Nonpartisan does not mean not racist. And there are still racist Democrats. I know that we don't like to talk about that in progressive spaces, but we got to. Let's rip this Band-Aid all the way off, my friends. Okay? And so some of the concern with these independent, nonpartisan commissions is that you end up with no diverse districts. So districts that are not Voting Rights Act compliant, and or districts that don't take into trends around diversity, right? Because you can have diversity that doesn't reach the VRA thresholds. And then you end up with less diverse, less representative Congresses than you started out with. And some of that has started to show itself in some of these states that have enacted some of these independent nonpartisan commissions. And I understand who's on this call, right? We got influencers, we have folks that are active in all the progressive groups, and y'all know just like I know where the Black Caucus has been on this. And I think that people have taken a point of view that says, you know, well, you just need to vote for it because this whole thing needs to pass. I agree that this needs to pass, but if this comes back around again in the next Congress, we need to get this right, okay? Because nonpartisan, they are very, 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 very different. Partisanship and racism are different constructs, and racism is a lingering issue in this country, even in blue states like I live in, okay? So let's all just reflect on that, and I'm happy to offline with folks who really wanna have that conversation.
Thank you for that. Do you know, do you have any idea in terms of where the bill is in the Senate and whether there are any senators who are working on sort of fixing that part of the legislation?
Oh, I don't think that they're fixing this. I think that people assume this bill is dead in the Senate because of some pronouncements by some Democratic senators.
Yeah.
So, you know, again, I would hope that these folks on this call who are, you know, leaders in national advocacy organizations have a plan. Because guess what? All the energy had been focused on the House. And I think that maybe we had neglected having some conversations in the Senate. There have been some assumptions made. Mm-hmm. We can't do that again. We cannot have our agenda stymied by folks who share values.
Hear, hear.
Tweet that.
You what?
I'm gonna get in trouble. Please don't tweet that.
Deal.
Okay.
Yeah, we control the recording, so we'll make sure that one stays tucked in. Jamie, you've been monitoring the Q&A. Do you want to anything from the crowd here?
There's one on the VRA. Until the VRA is amended and introduced, is there any limits on the racial gerrymandering? And there's a little confusion on what was gutted in the Shelby decision.
Yeah, so the Shelby decision had to do with pre-clearance. Basically, it used to be that anytime a state wanted to change the lines and play around with these kinds of voting rights and representation, particularly for, I don't know what the exact phrase is, but like key communities, like diverse communities, they had to send that map over to the Department of Justice to get approved. That has now gone away. So as a result, you saw these crazy maps. Pennsylvania had a crazy map, North Carolina, Wisconsin, right? Like there's all these states, and we're not just, hello, Southern states. Voter suppression happens everywhere, people, everywhere. And so, yes, Kathy, and voter suppression happens everywhere. And so that's what happened with the Shelby decision. And what is going on right now is we have to get the Voting Rights Act in tip-top shape so that it can withstand litigation, right? Because we know this will end up back in the Supreme Court. And so this is not something that you can rush. You have to build, like, I think they call it like the evidentiary record. Listen, I'm not on the Judiciary Committee, but you have to build up all this evidence to show what congressional intent is so that when these people come and try to undermine, which again, is not always partisan. People who are against voting, like, I think that many of us view the world in partisan terms. People who are against voting rights often operate outside of a partisan structure. Okay, and so these people are going to come and try to undermine our voting rights. And I think that we have to have the strongest version of the bill get signed into law. And sometimes you have to be patient and wait for that to happen.
Is there currently a calendar on the House side for introducing for voting on the John Lewis?
That I don't know. Okay. I know that Terry Sewell is working on it, and I trust her.
Okay.
She represents Selma in Alabama.
Last I heard it was June, so early June.
Great. I got my voting rights button ready to go. So whatever that means.
Jamie, any more from the Q&A?
This is really on the, with the, for the people dead, what do you think the chances of passing the John Lewis voting rights are? And will that have any effect on the state voter suppression laws?
I think it depends on when it passes. This is a bill that would have to have bipartisan support because the filibuster still exists. So you need 60 votes. I don't know how many folks have gotten Republicans to pledge support. So, we have a little bit of a journey again in the Senate. But in 3 minutes, y'all have an expert on the Senate coming. So maybe Senator Jones can give some insight on his friends and colleagues. I don't know.
We may have been planning to ask him some of those questions. Jamie, maybe one last question, or?
And I believe that this was something that Manchin had done, is actually applying the VRA to apply to all 50 states. Is that correct?
I don't know.
Yeah. I believe that's actually what Manchin and Murkowski wanted to do.
So if we don't have any more Q&A from the audience, what I would like to ask you, Representative Underwood, how can we as a community help you help to make sure that you win in 2022?
Well, thank you. I actually have one of the top 5 closest House races in 2020. I won by 5,300 votes out of 400,000 cast, 1.4%. And folks thought that we were going to have a blowout. Okay. It came as a huge surprise to all of us, including me, which means we don't have time to waste, my friends. We are getting started right now. We can't wait for the next map. We can't wait for that map to be finalized. We can't wait to start door knocking. We are getting started right now. So I'm going to invite you to visit underwoodforcongress.com, where you can sign up to volunteer, where you can donate. I need your contributions and your investments, and where you can engage with us. Because if we're going to hold this House majority, which we cannot take for granted, we have to hold the Illinois 14th. The reason I say we have to is we are in a blue state. So if we are losing Dems in blue states, we will lose the House. Does that make sense to everybody? And that is not a place where we want to be. So please join Team Underwood. I am grateful for the time to be with you. I am personally very optimistic about 2022. Here's why. I know that Dems like to, wallow in, I don't know about the midterms. Here's what I'm gonna say. When we flipped the House in 2018, this time in 2017, people were on fire about healthcare. We were all activated. We had our indivisible groups. We were doing marches. We had science march, attached march, and all kind of women's march, and all kind of marches in our community. People were activated. You don't see the other side doing that right now. The only way the other side wins is by restricting our right to vote and amplifying, division. They divide and conquer. We unite and work for the people. Okay, but we can't be broke and do it, right? We can't be disorganized and do it. And we can't wait to do it. So I would invite you to join our team. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I think you'll have some takers. So thank you so much for joining us. It's been a real pleasure. Like I said, maybe we could, as we shift topics over time, maybe we could have you back and talk some healthcare.
Oh yeah.
Which I know is a very important issue for you. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good night. Take good care of yourselves, everybody, and take advantage of the opportunity to get vaccinated.
Oh yes, totally vaccinated. Team vaccinated.
Yep.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, and now we welcome Senator Doug Jones to the call. So excited. Just thrilled to have you here with us, Doug. For those of you who don't know Doug, which I can't imagine there's anybody on this call who doesn't know you and your work, but just in case they need a refresher, of course, Senator Jones was a U.S. attorney in Alabama. He was elected to the U.S. Senate in 2017 for Alabama. And that was the first Alabama Democrat to win a Senate seat in 20 years. As U.S. Attorney, Doug successfully prosecuted two the KKK, I'll just say that, members for the 1963 bombing of the Birmingham church that killed 4 Black girls. And he has just been a powerhouse for civil rights and justice. You know, yeah, I guess you left your Superman cape off for the call, but definitely he's been a hero for many people in Alabama and throughout our country. In the Senate, Doug found ways to work across the aisle and joining many bipartisan efforts to improve American lives. You know, he focused on kitchen table issues, what's important to the family who's trying to put food on the table, pay their bills, and have a good life for their children. And in 2020, DemCast was very proud to be a cheerleader and supporter of your efforts, and we helped raise about $80,000 to support your campaign. And our members, of course, provided digital support for impartial justice. Doug was a leader during the first impeachment trial. He had daily, videos where he would just shoot straight and tell people, what it was like, what it was about, and that really made a huge difference, I think. And personally, for me, the 2017 race was the first time I'd ever been involved campaigning across state lines. It really had not occurred to me I'm in Red, Tennessee, so I know just right up the street from you, and the sort of despair of being a Democrat in a ruby red place. So being involved and then just watching you win. I know how much effort it took. Many significant amount of people were all in on that race, but it was because of your leadership, I think, that really made people understand that the choice was about choosing an honorable man to represent Alabama, and they made the right choice in 2017. There was actually a tweet today I saw, what were your top 5 political moments and that you've experienced, and that definitely made my top 5, was watching the returns come in and watching you get across the finish line. So welcome to our call.
Thank you, Lori. Thanks everybody, but particularly to you, Lori, and Jamie and Nick. Thanks for all you're doing with DemCast, what you've done, what you're doing now, what you're going to be doing. It's so important. And thanks to everybody on the call for joining tonight. Thanks for all you're doing with DemCast, but also, on a real personal note, I don't know how many people are on this call tonight. I can only see a couple, but I know there's a lot of people on this call. I know there are a lot of people that did a lot for me in 2017 to get me to the United States Senate. And you did a lot to try to keep me there. And I am sorry that we couldn't make it across the finish line. We were facing incredible odds here in Alabama. But let me tell you something, guys. What we did in 2017 with your help, with DemCast help, with everybody on this call, with your help, what we did in 2017 made a huge difference in this country. Everywhere that Louise and I traveled for so long afterwards, I kept hearing the word hope. That was something I didn't really appreciate when we decided to run, when I was running after I got just initially elected. But in hindsight, you can understand, I guess, that when a state like Alabama can elect a Democrat who is, by all indications, not your typical Southern politician, but somebody who believes in people, somebody who believes in Constitution, somebody who doesn't, who throws caution to the wind instead of following the politically correct thing to do. You can understand, I guess, why it might have given some people some hope. And I wish we could have carried it forward. I would love to have been reelected. But the fact is, with your help, we did so much. We were able to do so much. And that work has got to continue. That work has got to continue now. It's got to continue in 2022. It's got to continue in 24, 26, 28, and you can go on and on. One of the problems, guys, and y'all may have heard me speak about this before, Democrats have just not played a long game. We've somehow looked from one election cycle to the next. We've looked at, well, okay, we lost this, we won this, what went right, what went wrong? And we look for the next really shiny penny as a candidate. And we don't do the work in the field that DemCast is starting to do, that DemCast is working on, because that's where we make the changes. It's not with candidates, it's with people, it's with the voters, it's with folks who are going to get enthused and engaged with our ideas, with our prospects, with our hope for the future. That's how we're going to make a difference in this country. That's how we made a difference in 2020 by electing Joe Biden. Even though we're a razor thin majority in the Senate, guess what? We're still a majority. We've still got the gavel. We've still got the chair. Even though we're a thinner majority in the House, we're still a majority. And it's because people got out and said those things that are necessary, that related to people on an individual basis. And so what do we see right now happening? What we see is all of a sudden Republicans have got their hair on fire because they fully expected for Donald Trump to get reelected, to take back the House, to take the Senate. And when that didn't happen, they decided that, well, we've got to stop this. We got to do it in the only way we can, and that's to look at traditional Democratic voters and see what we can do to keep them out of the polls. Keep them from voting early, keep them from voting by mail, keep them from going to the polls on the day. It's not registration anymore, folks. Make no mistake, voter registration is still important. I'm not minimizing that. It's always important, especially for those that are younger, turning 18, and those first-time voters. But let me tell you, voter engagement is the key to this. Voter engagement and getting people engaged with the political process and making sure they understand that their vote makes a difference. Even a state like Alabama, their vote makes a difference. That's going to be the key to making sure that we get the changes. So right now, what we're seeing across this country, people talk about Jim Crow, people talk about Voting Rights Act. People talk that this is, attack on minority voters. Well, folks, what we're seeing across this country is attack on democracy. Mm-hmm. Don't pigeonhole this into a voting block or a race or a segment. This is an attack on democracy. When Republican leaders across the country in the various states have known, as Congresswoman Underwood said, everybody knows that there was no fraud in this election. Everybody understands this is one of the most secure elections that we ever conducted. But guess what? Folks didn't win the way they thought they could win. So what they've got to do is they got to artificially create a straw man so that they can pass these draconian laws to try to keep people from the ballot box. It's not going to keep people from registering. It's going to keep people from the ballot box. It's going to deter folks from standing in line. It's going to deter folks from voting early. It's going to deter folks from getting out and making sure that their votes cast. So we've got to rise to this challenge. Now, I'm going to be honest with you about a number of things today. And for those of you who have followed me, you know that's the only way I roll. I'm a big proponent of HR 1. I am a big proponent, top to bottom. Now, there's a couple things I might tweak, but top to bottom, HR 1 is a strong bill, and it laid down a marker to try to stop this. And remember, this really started, HR 1 was there before all these voter suppression laws were really starting being enacted. What we heard after the November election was all of the things about to stop the steal, voter fraud, whatever. But by the time HR 1 was filed in the Congress, there was not a lot of this voter suppression laws out there. So HR 1 was really this pro-democracy bill from top to bottom that included it includes not only protecting the right to vote and access to the ballot box. It does things like getting rid of dark money, making sure that we have bipartisan, nonpartisan districts being drawn, making sure we get some campaign financing, making sure we have ethics. A lot of people don't realize there's ethics provisions in HR 1. There's DC statehood provisions in HR 1. Puerto Rico provisions for statehood in HR 1. That was a big bill. But since that bill was introduced, what we have seen is this attack on democracy. And the attack on democracy is access to the ballot box. The attack on democracy is trying to keep people of color, keeping minority communities, and even rural white voters from voting in the way that they should, and making it easy and accessible to vote. So here we are. Now we've got this bill pending, and we hear a lot, and we've seen what's happening in Georgia and Florida. We see the recounts going on in Arizona. We see 43 states that have some form of this. And what can we do? We got to figure out a way to stop it. That's the bottom line. And folks, I got to tell you that when we're talking about voting and we're talking about voting rights and the way that the Congress operates and the way legislation operates, we're going to have to make some tough choices. Mm-hmm. We got to figure out what it is that we really want to accomplish here and try to make sure we get that accomplished, because we can't accomplish it all. It's never going to happen. Yeah, just let's be candid about this. HR 1 is not likely to pass in the form that it is now. So we got to figure out what we can do. It is great to think big. It is great to push and to talk about this. But so much emphasis right now is on this voter suppression. What can we do? I said all along that Democrats, after the November election, have this incredible opportunity, because Donald Trump and Republicans kept talking about all of this voter fraud. Well, there's a way to correct that. If you want to stop this, let's get some uniform standards across the country. Instead of a hodgepodge of 50 states, let's get some standard. Remember, every 2 years, there's a federal election. Every 2 years, a member of Congress is on the ballot. Every 4 years, the president's on the ballot. Every 6 years, there's a Senate seat on the ballot. Every 2 years, it's on the ballot somewhere. So there's a federal election every 2 years. And if the federal government is electing their representatives every 2 years, then the federal government needs to come and to have these minimum standards that will allow early voting, that will allow mail-in voting, that will help secure the ballot, that will give money to these local officials, as Congresswoman Underwood talked about, to secure these ballots. Those are the kind of things that I think we have to focus on to make sure that we can get that. And I am absolutely convinced, and I may be wrong, I really believe that if Democrats will focus on those ballot measures, then you can get 60 votes. You don't have to worry about the filibuster. You can get 60 votes. It's when you get into the other areas like campaign finance, which we all agree should be done. That's a poison pill in the U.S. Senate for the folks on the other side of the aisle. When you get into ethics issues, as strange as that might be, that can be a poison pill. It ought to be something everybody agrees on. But what I think we have got to do is that we need to make sure that we don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. We've got to make sure that we stop this assault on democracy in its tracks. And I've said all along, I'm an institutionalist when it comes to the United States Senate. I've always believed that the filibuster has its place. I really do, because I always believe that a compromise, a bipartisan agreement on a bill that can get enough votes to pass is the most important piece of legislation you can get. It's happened before. It happened in 1964 with the Civil Rights Act. It happened in 1965 with the Voting Rights Act. And so I believe that the filibuster has a place, but at the same time, I also believe that we have such an assault on democracy that if we have a bill that can stop that assault, that Congress has got to be the backstop one way or another. Congress can't let, and Democrats can't let the enemy be the perfect be the enemy of the good. And we've got to find that backstop. But before we can get there, we got to make sure that we try. And we got to make sure that we do this. I know that there is some concern. I think I heard Nick maybe asking a question of Congresswoman Underwood, that here we are and we've got a new administration and we got both houses of Congress, and yet we haven't got HR 1 passed. It's not even on the floor. Folks, it's only been 4 months. Joe Biden was sworn in just 121 days ago. This is not something that can happen overnight, even when you have both houses of Congress. 4 months ago, and 4 months when he had to deal with a pandemic and had to get money into people's pockets, had to get businesses back open, had to get shots in people's arms for a vaccine. I think he's done an amazing job of trying to get this country back on its feet, rolling again to where we're seeing venues opening up. We're seeing things, we're seeing some sense of normalcy come back to America, come back across the globe. But that's because of the leadership of this administration, doing the really hard things and making sure they try to get help. They want to reach across the aisle and get buy-in from Republicans. But if you don't, that had to be done. And so now, after this has happened, now the tough work is beginning on infrastructure, on HR 1, on any number of things. And you've got issues involving the Middle East that have popped up. There's all manner of things. But the fact of the matter is, HR 1 in some form, I think, can pass. It's an incredibly important bill that we need to be working on. The one thing I might disagree a little bit with Congresswoman Anderson earlier, she made a comment. She said voting rights are generally outside a partisan structure. I'm not sure I agree with that. I do think there is an element of racism, as she discussed, and y'all have heard me talk about that on the floor, on voting rights and healthcare, in law enforcement. There is certainly that there. It exists throughout this country. And as she said, it exists in blue states as well as red states like Alabama. But I do believe that there is more partisanship in the voting issues that we have today than we've ever had before. And the reason I think that is because people have tended to vote in these blocks. And we see so many of the minority community that tend to vote Democrat. And the only way to try to stop those votes from getting out there to support Democrats is to figure out ways to suppress those votes. But I really think, as much as there is a racial element in that, there's also a raw political power element to it. Who wants to get control? Who wants to stay in control? Those are issues. And I think we've got to fundamentally look at this as much as anything as a partisan issue of power. You only have to listen to the words of Mitch McConnell when he says that my job is to make sure that we stop everything that Joe Biden is doing, the entire Biden agenda. That is purely partisanship in order for him to try to get his gavel back as the majority leader of the Senate. And God knows what will happen if that's the case again. So I think we've got some real opportunities, folks. But I'm going to tell you, we've only got those opportunities with folks like that are on this call today. We've only got those opportunities with folks like DemCast and so many others that are reaching the grassroots, that are going out to the people in social media and knocking on doors and doing those kind of things to lift people up, to let folks remember that it was Democrats that gave them the 40-hour work week, Democrats that gave them the 15-hour, the minimum wage that needs to be raised, that everybody knows needs to be raised. But it was Democrats that gave them a minimum wage to begin with. It was Democrats that gave them the Social Security, Democrats that gave them Medicare, Democrats that gave them Medicaid, Democrats that put men on the moon, Democrats who have built the infrastructure of this country and built those kitchen table issues. We've got to make sure people remember that and know about that and talk about those issues and take it straight to them on every issue. I can tell you in Alabama, I had these conversations last night with some of my friends with the Hoover Democrats here in Jefferson County, Alabama. And to remind them that it was the Democrats in Alabama that built Redstone Arsenal and Fort McClellan. It was Democrats in Alabama that gave us the Clean Water Act and your higher education loans. It was Democrats who did that. Those are the kind of issues that we have to make sure that people know that Democrats care. They care about them. And that means listening to them and believing in them and understanding that they are out there, that we've got to make sure that we represent all these folks one way or another. And we do that with folks like DemCast, the folks on this call, being the advocates. But again, we also need to make sure we can't let the enemy, perfect be the enemy of the good. We've got to make sure that we make the changes in this country because our democracy is at stake. Our entire democracy is at stake. And you know, guys, I got to be honest with you. And folks in Alabama heard me say this a few times. And not everybody likes it, but it's the fact of legislative life and the fact of American politics. It's kind of the Mick Jagger view of politics. You can't always get what you want, but if you try sometime, you just might find you get what you need. We need a lot in this country, and it's up to you and each of us to make that happen over the course of the next 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, 8 years, and beyond. Mm-hmm. So thanks, Lori. Thanks, Nick. Thanks, Jamie. I really appreciate it. It's great to be with everybody. I wish we could all be in a big venue somehow and talk, and maybe we'll do that again soon.
That's wonderful. And, you know, I do think that there is some hope on the bipartisan side. I'm hearing that there's good progress being made on the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. That I know Cory Booker said, I think today or yesterday, that he's more hopeful that they'll get a bipartisan agreement on that. And but yeah, I think it's definitely it's a power issue for sure. You know, people are asking, well, why didn't Mitch McConnell, you know, blow up the filibuster when they had, you know, control of the Senate? It's because they had no intention of passing any actual legislation. That's
absolutely right, Lori. I mean, let me tell you, Mitch McConnell did exactly what he wanted to do. Mitch McConnell only cared about one thing, and that's putting judges on the bench.
Right.
Okay. And he did it. Mm-hmm. He absolutely did it. You know, I had this conversation with somebody a little bit earlier today. People talk about the filibuster, but let me tell you something. One of the things that I think ought to be a pet peeve is that we ought to convince the Judiciary Committee to get rid of the damn blue slips, so that a Republican senator can't block a judge. Just block it by not returning the blue slip to the Judiciary Committee and just go ahead and vote. And let's get these district court judges and get these other judges. Because when I came to the Senate in 2018, I had to vote on like 8 or 9 Alabama judges. And about 6 or 7 of those had been vacant for 2, 3, 4, and even 5 years under the Obama administration because of blue slips, and they wouldn't allow them to come to a vote. We need to get our judges on the bench.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know that it looks like Q&A is just totally blown up here. Jamie, you want to ask a couple of questions from there?
Yes, it is completely blown up. Not even sure where to go. One is actually a little bit off topic, but you might be a really good one. And it is on, oh no, I've lost it in here.
Well, just make up one, Jamie. It's okay.
So, well, there's actually 2 really good ones. One is, will Kristen Clark how much say will she have in actually changing the DOJ and the Civil Rights Division with her confirmation today?
I think that's an important confirmation. Kristen is a great lawyer. She's a brilliant lawyer. I think that is an incredibly important. It sends, and you know, sometimes in Washington and in with administrations and in Congress, there are so many messages that can be sent simply by confirmation. And the fact that you had a Black female that for the history making as head of the Civil Rights Division sends a message. But Kristen is a bridge builder, okay? That was the thing. I had an op-ed this morning in Morning Consult about her nomination. She is a bridge builder. That's been her history. And she comes from a background where she is so conscious of the civil rights and civil liberties that so many people are being deprived of, but at the same time, she's been able to work with people. I think she's got some amazing opportunities to help forge that compromise that Lori was talking about earlier, because we're that close, folks, where it's just about qualified immunity, and they ought to be able to work that out. We're that close. I think she can help forge that compromise. But importantly, too, I think she will once again get back to holding these law enforcement communities to their job and to task, and to make sure that if they are falling down and there are these systemic problems that we've seen, like the Justice Department is now investigating Minneapolis and a couple of others. I think you're going to see Kristen taking the lead in doing that again. I think she's got some real opportunities, but again, the reason is because I think she can build bridges. And that's what it takes in that as head of the Civil Rights Division. You cannot just be my way or the highway. And she can do that because she comes from a place, she has seen it firsthand, but at the same time, she understands and knows that there is a community out there of law enforcement that, quite frankly, we need to protect all of us, to protect citizens. And finding that sweet spot to get things done, I think she can do it. Was so excited. I just wish she had gotten more Republican support. She deserved more Republican support than she got.
I think certainly a question that's come up in Q&A is just, you know, what should we as activists, what should be our messaging around, maybe particularly, you know, for the people, you know, should we be identifying really the critical provisions that would protect access to the voting booth and really push forward on those? What messaging would make a difference, do you think?
Well, I'm going to be real candid about this, and not everybody on this call will agree with me, and I appreciate the voices that don't. But I think we ought to really be honed in, focusing on access to the ballot box and those uniform standards, so that people will know and understand and have these minimum standards that will require states to do early voting, to do mail-in voting, and to do it in a way that's secure. I think with what we've seen around the country, and again, I don't want anybody on this call to think that I am minimizing the need for the ethics provisions, minimizing the need for the campaign finance, which I'm a big proponent of doing, anything like that. But the seeds that we're seeing right now, the attacks on democracy, I think are so imminent. They are just imminent. They're hitting us every friggin' day, guys, with these things. We have got to get Congress, we've got to get the Senate and the House to be the backstop on that. And if we can be the backstop on that, then we can get so much other things done. If we can't be the backstop on those, I want y'all to think about this. You got to play this out long term. If we can't be the backstop and these voter suppression laws go into effect, look at what we have to lose. And if we can't get the backstop there, the rest of it we'll never ever get, because these laws will take effect. And we got to make sure that we backstop these laws. That's my view. That's what I've been preaching. A lot of people will disagree with that because there's so many people that are passionate about campaign finance. And I get that. I am too. But I want to stop this assault on democracy. I want the Congress of the United States to put up their hands and say, hell no, this is not going to happen on our watch. This is not going to happen. I heard McConnell the other day talking about how the Democrats were trying to change, you know, that one party was trying to change the voting laws. Hell, it's his party that's trying to change the voting laws. They're the ones doing it, not us. We're trying to be consistent.
Right.
punch a button there, Lori, and I'll start rambling.
Yeah, no, and it's not just voting, right? There's over 100 bills targeting the right to protest. There are 38 bills targeting ballot initiatives in states like Utah, where we've, Kansas, Missouri, where we've passed progressive legislation through the ballot box. And now they're targeting that. So it's an overall assault on democracy. And I don't think most people realize, and the cat just made an appearance, so I will apologize now.
I think the cat has just stole the show, Jamie. I'm just telling you.
Wait till she bites me, then she really will steal the show.
No, but you're absolutely right. But I want you guys to think about this. Now, I am one to preach a lot about gerrymandering. I just think that is the bane of democracy's existence right now. But if we don't stop the assault on the voting and democracy on the voting, we can't stop anything else. Mm-hmm. I mean, we'll never stop anything else if we can't stop that. And so we got to have those priorities to stop that. And then we can focus, because you're right. You're absolutely right. The assault on ballot initiatives, that's incredible. Now, Alabama doesn't have that. They saw the handwriting on the wall years ago. By the way, it was Democrats that saw that handwriting on the wall that didn't want that years ago. But there's an assault on that. There's assault on the right to peacefully protest and those kind of things. But those will stay in place if we don't stop the voting suppression issues that are out there. I'm telling you, democracy and every value that you've got depends on trying to be the backstop of these voter suppression laws.
Mm-hmm. And do you think, Doug, if, I mean, I know that Senator Manchin has, said he thinks he can get 10 Republican votes and he's working on that. But do you think that in the end, even if they stripped it down and they couldn't get 10 Republican votes, do you think that the Senate would be willing to change the filibuster rules or reform it?
I really do believe that. Well, modify them.
Right.
I really do believe, like Joe Manchin, that anything involving our democracy like this, anything that involves voting, needs to be bipartisan if it can possibly be bipartisan. Again, the Voting Rights Act was passed with bipartisan support. It would have never passed without Everett Dirksen and Republicans voting for it when you had Southern Democrats blocking it the whole time. It passed almost unanimously, I think, in the Senate the last time it was renewed. So it's important when you're talking about democracy that you try to achieve that. But I think at the end of the day, if there is legislation before the U.S. Senate that deals with those democratic institutions of voting, I think that the Senate could very easily modify the filibuster rule for that issue alone. And I think you could very well get people like Manchin and others to go along with it, because at the end of the day, I know Joe, I know the Democrats that are in that Senate, they want people to be able to vote. Mm-hmm. They want people to be able to have unfettered right to vote. They want consistency among the states to vote. And if Republicans continue to push and push and push, at some point you got to ask, this ain't about democracy for you guys.
Right.
This is about power. Mm-hmm. This is about keeping people down so you can hold on to your gerrymandered districts and your red states. Mm-hmm. And I think that's when you see Joe and others pushing back. So that's kind of what I think. But again, it's got to be focused on our democratic institutions of voting.
And I think right now, so with such a razor thin majority in the Senate, I mean, it would just takes one senator to get ill, much less 2022 that we lose the majority. But
right.
I think that's what makes people so nervous about drawing this out, is we just know we're hanging by a thread there.
Yeah, I mean, but look, we've still got plenty of time. Okay. and you need to let democracy play out a little bit, even in the United States Senate. Nothing gets done really quickly. You need to let democracy play just a little bit longer before we make the decision. You need to let folks talk to each other and try to see if there is areas of common ground. And then if there is, great. If there's not, then you got to deal with it. And that time is coming.
Yeah.
Okay. That time is coming. But because of a January 6th insurrection, because of the pandemic and the COVID packages that have to be done, those have been on the real front burner here. And it was only after some of that passed that folks really got, in the Senate anyway, got down to work and looking at these others. But you're right. There's a limited window. And I want people to understand this as well. When we're talking about a limited window, it's not just because Democrats get control. Remember, right now, if tomorrow the Democrats completely do away with the filibuster and pass every law that you guys on this call want, it can all be undone after 2024. If we lose the House, we lose the Senate, and we lose the presidency. There is, a problem here that we've got to deal with. It is great to get an agenda, but we've also got to be looking beyond that, because right now, the courts, the federal judiciary is stacked to the brim with Donald Trump nominees, because the filibuster was busted for the Supreme Court and the Court of Appeals and district court judges.
It's so important. I want to have good use of everyone's time. I know we've run over a little bit. We'd love to have you on hours and hours of talks because you have such a great perspective. But I will just wrap up that I think everybody on the call is interested in knowing. So what's in your future, Doug? We like having you around. What are your plans?
Well, it's 8:08 in Alabama, so there's a bourbon in my future, immediate future. That's the main thing. Okay. I'm really fortunate to have landed with a really good law firm. I'm counsel to Aaron Fox, which was a very, it's a firm that I think has a rich history in social justice and equality. That firm has an Institute for Racial Equality that was in the works and done before the George Floyd death. I'm splitting time there, and I'm working as a distinguished senior fellow with the Center for American Progress. And again, I'm going to be focusing on racial equality, social justice, voting rights, the very things that we've been talking about here. And we got some other things politically, not as a candidate necessarily at all, but I got some things that I want to do. I got a lot of unfinished business, I think, in Alabama and in the South. And so in the next 2 or 3 months, you're going to see some things maybe from us down here, some things that we're going to be working on to try to get folks engaged in the South and in Alabama, to find out, to try to get younger folks engaged. Guys, I got to tell you that, we can talk about, we can have a lot of people on this call, we can talk about social media, but at the end of the day, there's so many of our younger voters, and I'm not talking about just the 18 to 20-year-olds, I'm talking about under age 45,
Right.
just don't get out to vote. Why is that? Is it just, are they too busy? Do they not care? I don't know, but we're going to be finding out, because I want to get folks engaged. I want this younger generation to be able in a few years to be that older generation that right now Democrats complain of the older generation voting because they all vote Republican. I want in a few years for Republicans to be claiming about the older generation, that is our younger people now, because they're all voting Democratic and they're all voting on the things that we like. So I got a lot going on. There's a lot. You're going to see me and hear from me off and on a good bit. I'm going to stay engaged. I'm going to stay engaged with DemCast. Try to help you guys as much as I can. And let's just keep this country rolling forward. We've got some great opportunities with my friend Joe Biden as president, and my friend Kamala Harris is vice president. We've just got to make sure that our Congress is going to be responsive. But to do that, we got to get them elected.
Mm-hmm. Well, we'll be working right alongside you to do our best to make that happen. And thank you so much for joining us. It was our our pleasure and to have you on, and you're welcome back anytime.
Yep. Thank you.
guys. Good-
Thank you so much, Senator Jones.
My pleasure, Nick. Y'all take care. Good night.
Good night.
All right. And good night, everybody. Thanks for the call.